Hello and welcome back. Today I want to talk to you about the Persian Wars that the Greeks fought in the early part of the 5th century BCE. Before we should talk about that, let's talk about our main source for this period. And our main source for this period is a fellow named Herodotus. I call him the father of history. What do you need to know about Herodotus? You need to know this. He's not actually from Athens, though he writes about the Athenians quite a bit. He's from a place called Halicarnassus, which is in modern-day Turkey. He's born around 520, but he came to live in Athens during its golden age. And during this time, Athens was the preeminent center of culture and military power in the Greek world. When he was born, however, Athens was still a bit of a backwater, so he got to see it rise and become what it would come to be. The emergence of Athens as an important state would shape the way he wrote his histories. Why is Herodotus so important for us? Well, he's a source about the kind of things we want to know about, in this case, the Persian Wars. He's more important than that, though, because he isn't just a source for this or that particular event. Herodotus is the first person to write history in the modern sense of the word. He doesn't just write that one thing happened, and then another thing happened, and then a third thing happened. He actually investigates and analyzes the evidence at hand and decides which of the competing series of narratives is actually most logical. In places where he can't decide, he actually leaves it up to you. When we think of history, we should think of Herodotus. I'm not saying that other people weren't keeping records or chronicles before him. I'm saying he's the first person to do history in a way that is more than just a chronicle. He makes an inquiry. So let's talk about the Persian Wars and the causes of them. Did the Persian Wars start because a Spartan king kicked a Persian envoy into a well? No, they didn't. The Persian Wars began with, of course, the Persians. Cyrus the Great is a Persian king. He's the first king of the Persian Empire, and took over a lot of territory, and what we now think of is Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey in a very quick amount of time. And took Persia from being this tiny little area on the map here to an empire, a multinational empire, that would stretch all the way up into Afghanistan, around the Black Sea, and into the modern Holy Land, over through the edge of Anatolia here. He was succeeded by a king called Cambyses. He was succeeded by Darius. Here's what you need to know of each of these kings. As they invaded the territory they took over, they were forming an empire in its truest sense. They let local administrators do their thing, for the most part, and kept what were called satrap kings underneath them. In order to preserve this peace, all they asked was that each local king submitted tokens of submission, earth and water. And if they came through and needed an army to go fight an enemy, you had to contribute troops. Otherwise, the Persians more or less left you alone. Cyrus is famous for his benevolence, even helping the Israelites rebuild their temple in Jerusalem. So where did all the trouble come in with the Greeks? Here goes. The Athenians were encouraging people in Ionia here along the western coast of what is now Turkey to revolt against their Persian governors when the Persians took them over. And part of this had to do with the missionary zeal the Athenians had for spreading democracy. With the help of the Athenians, the Ionians attacked and burned the city of Sardis in 498. The result of this is the Persians would set into motion an invasion of mainland Greece. The consequences of this war would be that mainland Greece would stay free, but the kingdoms of Macedonia and Thrace would be added to the Persian Empire. Let's talk about the major battle of this conflict, and that's the Battle of Marathon, which happened on August 12th, 490 BCE. 10,000 Athenians and 1,000 Plataeans under the command of Miltiades, an Athenian general, square off against 20,000 Persian infantry and 5,000 Persian cavalry. And they do this on a beachhead on the opposite side of the Attic Peninsula, right over here. The first phase of the battle, the Greeks rush down the beach, and they feint, allowing the Persians to go through their center column. Then in the second phase of the battle, the Persians are surrounded as the Athenians close in around them, crushing them and making them flee back to their boats. Many Persians were killed in this battle, and the Persians were forced to more or less run away. There were other conflicts in the First Persian War, but the result was more or less it was a rout for the Persians, and the Persians would gain a bit of territory, but they wouldn't really gain a stronghold in mainland Greece. But this was not to be the end. After the First Persian War ended in a Greek victory over the Persians, the son of Darius, a man named Xerxes, decided to launch a full-scale invasion of Greece in retaliation. When I say full-scale, I mean full-scale. So here's how it went. Herodotus puts Xerxes' army for this invasion at 1.7 million soldiers. Is this really true? Probably not. Most modern scholars say it was closer to 125,000, or at the very most 250,000. Xerxes had to get his army from Asia into Europe. How would he do that? He could have put them all on ships, but sea travel was really unreliable back then, and you were really at the mercy of whatever storm happened to blow up that day. So he marched his army from Asia here into Europe over a strait of water called the Hellespont. And in order to do this, he bridged the Hellespont. When he built his first bridge, it actually failed and was wiped out in a storm. Xerxes is said to have had the Hellespont whipped 300 times by his commanders. His second bridge was a bit more sturdy, using 360 ships as pontoons. It was 3/4 of a mile in length, and it took his army quite a while to get across it. Another engineering feat he had to deal with was the problem of Mount Athos. That's this spot here. It looks like a third finger hanging off of the bottom of northern Greece. The problem with Mount Athos is he couldn't sail his fleet up to it without wrecking his fleet. He came up with a solution. The solution was to dig a canal through Mount Athos to cut it off of mainland Greece. And you can actually still see the channel to this day. Even though it's filled in, there's a lowered area on the edge of Mount Athos, which is where Xerxes dug his canal. And you can see it again here. He came down through northern Greece into Thermopylae, which is on the eastern side of Greece, near Euboea. Modern-day Thermopylae is actually not as close to the water as it used to be. The sea has receded a bit. But you can see here that they fought along this narrow plain right here. And what were the Greeks doing? The Greeks were guarding a pass by the water. Here's the pass, and here's the Persian army. The Persian army needed to get through this pass by these mountains if they were to go into southern Greece and take Athens and Sparta. How many were involved? There were 4,900 Greek allies involved in the defense of Thermopylae, and there were also 300 Spartans. The rest of the Spartan army couldn't be there due to the Carneia festival, a religious festival that prohibited them from going to war for a period of a month. They could send out a small expeditionary force, and they did so under King Leonidas, but that was the best they could do. After a few days of tough fighting, the Persians figured out that there was a goat path that led around the top of the mountain, and they were given this information by a Greek named Ephialtes, who was forever immortalized in Herodotus as the man who handed over the Greeks to their enemy. So the Persians went around the goat pass and attacked the Spartans from all sides, ending the conflict. King Leonidas, famed for his bravery in the battle, is said to have said "Molon Labe" when asked to put down his weapons by the Persians. Molon Labe is a saying means to come and get them. And this phrase has since been appropriated by many gun rights groups. Did Leonidas ever say it? Watch my next lecture on the 300 and the Battle of Thermopylae to find out. Here he is again immortalized in this statue at Thermopylae. Well, while Leonidas was slowing things down, a few other things were happening, and we had to back up a little bit. In 483, the Athenians discovered that they had access to a huge amount of silver because they had found a new silver mine in the Attic Peninsula. Themistocles, one of their commanders, was actually, through the power of speech, able to convince the Athenians that the thing they needed to do with this money, more than anything else, was to build a fleet of 200 triremes to save the Athenians from the Persian threat. The result was Athens was ready for naval battle against the Persians, and has come to fruition the Battle of Salamis. The second part of this is that they deforested the Attic Peninsula in order to build this fleet. If you go to Athens today, the area around Athens is actually semi-arid because all the trees were cut down to build this fleet. So what is the Battle of Salamis? So this happens very shortly after the Battle of Thermopylae. The holding action is over, and the Athenians figure out a genius ploy. They move most of the population of Athens onto the island of Salamis as bait to draw the Persians into a trap. The Athenian fleet was set out here, and the Persians swung their fleet into this channel, where their numbers did them very little good. In fact, the Persian fleet was 1,200 ships, and it was competing against an Athenian fleet of 370 or so ships. And the Athenians were able to consistently outmaneuver them as they were better sailors and crush them. Over 200 Persian ships were destroyed in this battle. The last major engagement of this conflict occurs the following year in the summer of 479 at Plataea. 40,000 Greek allies withdraw all the way into the Peloponnesus, that's that southernmost part of the Greek peninsula, and hole up behind fortifications they have there. And what they did was they left the city of Athens to be destroyed by the Persians. They just let them have it. And the Athenians would never forget this. They would never forget what the Persians would do to the city, destroying their temples, destroying their religious objects. What happened in this battle? The Greeks won by tricking the Persians into chasing them and suddenly turning and facing them in formation. The result was a devastating one for the lightly armored Persians. The remainder of the Persian forces were trapped in their own camp, and many who did not escape were slaughtered by the Greeks. I hope you've enjoyed this. Stay tuned for my next lecture on 300 and the real Battle of Thermopylae.